Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon where you are. This is Don Hester, and today's session we're going to talk about utilizing artificial intelligence to help combat ransomware and also help protect critical infrastructure. I know a lot of local governments kind of fall into that category of either being the victim of ransomware or having critical infrastructure that they need to protect. But certainly this goes beyond just local governments, although that is primarily my audience. So my name is Don Hester. I'm with Mays & Associates, and I'm an IT auditor and cybersecurity consultant for them. I've been an IT auditor for 20 years now. It makes me feel a little old, but anyways, my contact information and following our Bright Talk channel, if you want to see other upcoming webinars, you can do that. Also, we take those and put them on YouTube as well, so you can watch them on YouTube. And you can follow us on Twitter, and I have a blog as well. So before we start, if you're in the live session, you can ask a question, and at the bottom of your screen you should see, or the bottom of the screen that you see there, you should see ask a question. It's highlighted here, circled in red. There's also attachments that you can download. So the slides are here, and there's a couple of links that will take you to a ransomware checklist that we talked about in this session, and also another one that takes you to the Mays & Associates website. In addition, if you're watching this after the live presentation, you won't be able to ask a question, but you can certainly send us an email and we will follow up with that. Also, there's attachments that you would still be able to download. You can see at the bottom there, it looks slightly different because the Ask Question tab is missing from the thing. Also, for those of you that are credentialed CISSP, CISA, whatever certifications you may have, and you need certification that you've taken this, notice that there is on the right-hand side a viewing certificate. It actually will tell you how much time you spent watching the seminar. So if you watched 1 out of 60 minutes, it'll say 1 out of 60 minutes, that you can then use for proof that you attended this seminar for whatever self-reporting that you have for that. So I just wanted to point that out to everybody before I get started. So getting started, I have two other people that will be joining us. Nate is here, and also his colleague, and Jeff. We will be talking with them at the end. I wanted to start off with, as an IT auditor and as a cybersecurity consultant, mostly for local governments, I have to say that they have a unique threat landscape over and above other types of organizations. Part of the reason for that is they have a wide breadth of technology. Most local governments are using various different types of technologies, everything from parking meters to cameras to security systems to street lights. All those types of additional IoT or OT types of technologies that most regular companies aren't going to have, right? So you guys have a very wide breadth. Plus the adoption of the cloud, that adds another dimension to all of this. In addition to that, ransomware seems to be targeting local governments quite heavily lately. We saw like 20 towns in Texas get hit or was it 20 schools? I'm not sure. 20 of them got hit all at once, and it may be more than 20, maybe 23. I don't know. There's different, reports out there. But anyways, a number of them got hit. I know here in Northern California, there's at least 5 that I'm aware of, local governments that have been hit recently within the last 8 months or so. So you can see that there is a growing ransomware. What we found out about it is high probability. In other words, local governments are a target, and high impact. When it hits, it takes out stuff. So we wanted to put that out there. Other concerns that a lot of local governments have, phishing seems to be a huge one right now. Sending emails, asking for wire transfers, asking employees to do gift cards. There's all kinds of different phishing types of threats that are coming through there for local governments. All of my clients that I'm the auditor for have been reporting this. A lot of wire fraud or attempts at wire fraud are going on, and lots of just little nagging malware happening as well. Data breaches, not as much, and there's other seminars or webinars that I've done in the past that you can check out that talk about why local governments may not be as big on data breach, although it does happen. Also, we've seen that some of their systems have been turned into botnets. And one of the concerns I know a lot of local governments have with this top threats and concerns is the insurance coverage. Is insurance going to cover it? And then figuring out what they're going to do about risk management. The risk management is, in most local governments, is very robust when it comes to, the streets and the pavement and purchasing cars and purchasing other items. When it comes to cyber risk, it's kind of like missing. You see a lot of risk managers and local governments that just aren't aware of, they're used to the traditional risk management. They're not sure how that adapts to cyber risk management. And cybersecurity awareness being a big thing. And of course, being an election year, election security is also important and a concern for a lot of local governments. So there's a lot of different threats out there, not just ransomware. There's a bunch of other things out there that are a concern for local governments. In fact, the American Water Works Association, so if you work for a water district, one of the things that they had in their 2018 report is that cyber risk is their top threat that they're facing right now. So they put it as number one concern that they have. And that should be telling to us because that kind of tells you where it is. And if you look at some of the top ransomware targets, and this is from a few years back, but it still goes still holds true today, and that is that some of the top ransomware targets are local government, and that should be no surprise if you follow the news at all. But transportation, education kind of are either just ahead or just below it, and really in many instances, education is also local government or state government, depending on if it's stateful. But it could be a private school too, so I think maybe they just make that as a separate category. But if you take all of that and you add that into local government, that puts local government just under medical. So medical still being the top target currently, so things like hospitals and stuff like that. And I think it's because of the life safety and that those organizations are more willing to pay to get their defibrillators or whatever other types of devices they have back online. One of the things that we've noticed, and Infotech has done some research, and this goes back to 2017, is that local governments are much more riskier than they appear. In other words, they have a lot more risk than they maybe accounted for in the past. So it's kind of interesting to see that they realize that there's a lot of risk out there as well. And it's even in the news, the Washington Post even said that cities are being hit by ransomware attacks. So, if it's the Washington Post, it's probably a bigger deal than just an anomalous thing. So at the RSA conference last year, one of the speakers was talking about, she was the CISO of Colorado. If you saw that, she talked about the Department of Transportation having been hit by ransomware. And she said it's not a matter of where you think you are in the maturity level. It's just you're not in the news yet. So her assessment is you're eventually going to be in the news. And I think that is one of the things that we as cybersecurity professionals have kind of put out there. Is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. All the defenses that we put in place, they're always constantly, the bad guys are always constantly adapting to those. Even to the virus signatures of various different antivirus. And most of the organizations that are hit with ransomware have antivirus installed, fully up to date, and running on the systems that get hit. 93% of them. So obviously, the old days when, your anti-malware, antivirus that you had was enough, it's no longer enough. It's something that we have to go above and beyond, right? So if we have it and it's not working, it's not to say that it's not working. I mean, if you didn't have anti-malware, you'd probably get hit a lot sooner, right? It takes care of all the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So there's still other items out there that we have to be careful about and watch out for. So if we look at the 2019 stats for local governments, we found that 966 government agencies got hit, and that breaks down into 113 state and municipal governments, 764 healthcare. A lot of healthcare is also government run, so that's why they get included in this thing. And then we have 89 universities, colleges, and school districts. Now, the interesting thing, if you look at the 89 universities, colleges, and school districts, and you break it up by the actual sites that were hit, because you could have a school district and it can have 15 different schools in it, right? So if each of those 15 gets hit, well, it's more than 89, right? You have a lot of different organizations hit. So it actually turns out it's 1,233 total schools that were hit. So beyond the districts, it's really kind of a large impact. It's larger than, you know, when you look at 966, you say, oh no, that's not that big of a deal. But when you have 1,233 individual schools being affected, that means staff and instructors and teachers and students are not able to, you know, go through their curriculum. And it's interesting, and now we're struggling with coronavirus. There's a whole different thing, right? We're all working from home, and I'm glad that all of you that are online right now with us watching, you're probably at home doing so. If not, stay healthy, please. But so we can see that there's, you know, things that can kind of affect and totally change things. Here in Northern California, here's 4 of the local governments that have been reported as having been hit by ransomware. These are the ones that are available online that you can find out about, and that you can go check the news on it. Some of them kind of fly under the radar. I know right now, because of the coronavirus, that pretty much taking up all of the news coverage time. But there has been an uptick in ransomware attacks during this period of time. And in particular, we have seen that it is attacking healthcare at this point in time, which is like the worst thing we could possibly do, which, you know, apparently there's no honor among thieves, but because they're going to hit somebody when they're down. And I think the reason for that is obviously they're expecting them more likely to pay. That doesn't mean that local governments aren't currently a target, but it's a target nonetheless, that or a threat nonetheless, that we sort of need to watch out for. So if we look at CPO magazine had an article last year that kind of summarized, or earlier this year, kind of summarized the costs of ransomware in 2019. So it was a really good report, because they kind of went and talked to as many people as they could that had been hit by ransomware, specifically local governments, and saying, okay, what kind of things happened? You know, your website went offline. Well, that may not be the end of the world, right? If only the website goes offline. But a lot of other organizations, especially local governments, had 911 services were interrupted. So that's a big deal, right? Dispatch was not able to send out police officers because it was hit, right? So they had police officers locked out of background check systems, so they were unable to process background checks. These are all important services that have a life safety element to them too. And those services, being criminal justice information systems in local governments, have specific higher level security that they're supposed to have, and they're supposed to be segmented in the network, and yet they still got hit. So it tells us that we're not doing enough, right? If that was what was happening. So to look at ransomware, it has a high impact on the business processes of any organization. It takes, in some of the instances, it'll grind everything to a halt. I mean, business just stops, right? So there's oftentimes data loss because you cannot recover it, or at least data is inaccessible for a period of time. Sometimes IoT devices are just bricked. There's no way to fix them. You have to replace them, such as cameras or door reading systems and stuff like that. Some of these have taken months to recover. A number of them can recover within a month, you know, getting the backups back up and running, but trying to input all the data that's missing. I was at a conference earlier this year, and one of the organizations that had been hit with ransomware said that their financial system was out, and they had to re-input an entire year's worth of financial data. I don't know if you guys know that, but I work with accountants. They don't like having to do that. That's a lot of work. And then you end up with the possibility of getting a lot of mistakes because they're re-putting stuff in. They're not going through the process all over again. They're just trying to re-enter stuff. So there can be a lot of mistakes in their financial statements because of that. So it's not a win-win situation. That's a high impact type of an event. So So what are the other types of costs you have? Downtime, lost revenue. If you're a local government, you may not have lost revenue, but you may have lost or delayed tax collection. Your insurance deductible and insurance premiums will probably go up. You may have legal fees involved in it. Most importantly for local governments, your bond rating may go down, and that may not be a good thing. Talk to your city manager or your district general manager, and they will want to make sure their bond rating is as high as possible, because this is how you get bonds, and this is how you get your ratings for basically getting a loan. So it's equivalent to another organization having a bad credit score, right? So it affects those types of things. Recovery costs, forensic costs, incident response costs, staff overtime, consulting costs, and security controls that you have to put in place that you didn't put in place in the first place. So you end up having to spend the money either now or later, right? So we either spend the money now trying to implement the controls necessary to prevent, and if hit, to minimize the impact. It's better to pay it now than have to pay it in the future when you're over a barrel, right? So if you're having a hard time with your general manager, executive team, city manager trying to get budget, you may need to get the risk management team involved in this and say, hey, this is what the risks are. Are we prepared for this? Do we have enough insurance to cover it? Those are some of the questions that you probably want to ask. So what are the challenges that I know that a lot of local governments have? And Infotech has some information on this as well on their research. So it kind of lines up very closely with what I've observed, having over 100 municipal clients that I'm the auditor for. And that is that most of them have budget constraints, right? They don't have necessarily the budget necessary to implement what they need to do. We do the ransomware risk assessment, which you can download the free in the attachments. There's a link to get to it. You can get the free download for the checklist, and it's 80-some odd controls, and this comes from the federal government. We just put it into a usable form. In order for an organization, if we did a risk assessment for them, they had many of the controls in place, but they probably had about 30% that needed to be put in place. And they figured out that it was going to take at least 5 years and 7 figures in budget in order to get that completed. So it's going to take them 5 years to try and implement the controls that they need to have in place in order to prevent and minimize the impact of ransomware. So they don't have a whole lot of time between now and then. They got 5 years of exposure, basically, right? To get the controls in place to get this, they're not even, and again, even if you have the controls in place, the federal government, even though they recommend it, say, well, you know, this is going to decrease your likelihood. It's not going to necessarily prevent. Other thing that we find is staffing, training, not enough staff, and little or no training for staff on, you know, anything cybersecurity, whether it be forensics or incident response or business continuity. And often that is the first thing cut from the budget. So anytime budget gets hard, they say, oh, no more training. Of course, that's, you know, what did my grandfather always say? Cut your nose off to spite your face. And I have no idea what that necessarily means, but it sounds appropriate here, right? You're hurting yourself, and you don't realize that you're hurting yourself. Another problem that I oftentimes get is senior management support and involvement. They feel like senior management's not involved, or IT staff doesn't. And then we already talked about time to implement. And the other challenge is that usually IT in local governments has so much different technology going on that, especially for a local city or a county, because they have everything from street lights, parking meters, parking garages. They may have a golf course, a swimming pool, you know, Parks and Rec stuff. They may even have a theater or some other type of civic, you know, public, you know, items that have, you know, IT related to them. They have cameras and security systems, and then they have all the regular IT stuff. And then on top of that, if they have any utilities, then they may have operational technology or ICS systems in addition to all of that. So what you find is local governments have less staff, less money, budget constraints, but they have a lot more to do than a comparably sized corporation would have. So this is the challenge that they have. So it's hard for us to look at a budget of, let's say, a local city that has 200 employees versus a corporation that has 200 employees. They're not apples and apples, right? the local government is going to have different types of technology that it needs to be in charge of and controlling and managing risks for. So they're in a very unique situation. And what we find, and Infotech did this based upon their diagnostic programs that they have, you can see that there's this maturity level, right? At the very bottom, the red area is that IT is unstable, right? And then it goes all the way up to IT is an innovator, it's a business partner, it's a trusted operator, right? You're going up in levels, maturity levels, so to speak, in IT. And what we find for local governments is that where they want to be is obviously IT wants to be an innovator for the organization. However, what we really find is that they're just barely over unstable. And what's telling about this is that when we look at this, one of the problems that I always found is that governments like to compare themselves with other local governments, right? And so then they may think about all their peers that they're all about the same place. Now, if the average is that they just support the business and that's all they can do, and that's where they all are, then they think, oh, I'm just slightly ahead of the, the other two local governments there in my area. And I don't think we want to compare ourselves with each other necessarily, as we would like to compare all the local governments with what our ideal goals are, and that is being an innovator for the organization. And we're far off the mark as local governments for that, right? So that's what, so it's worth taking a look at and thinking about, okay, where do we need to be and what's going to take to get there? Obviously, so a little bit more about the wide breadth of technologies, but also a wide breadth of, compliance issues that related to that. Critical infrastructure is obviously part of it. Payment card information systems is obviously, most local governments take some form of payment. Many of them have criminal justice information systems, also 911 services. Some of them have ICS or operational technology. There's all kinds of IoT just hitting the market for everything, from conference room control systems to, one of the local governments asked me the other day, so is our traffic cameras, are they considered IoT, or are they considered OT? And I guess it's how you manage them, right? And I think maybe it's a distinction without a difference, and that is it's a non-traditional IT type of product, so you have to kind of take it into consideration and kind of handle it in that manner. Updates and patch management and vulnerability management is completely different and outside of the normal IT patch management system. There's a previous webinar on the channel, if you want to check that out, that talks about IoT and OT and some of the challenges related to that, if you want to check that out. And we also have cloud services on top of that, and obviously more complex because of all of that. And that means that there's a higher level of sophistication. So your inherent risk, this is auditor talk for a second, inherent risk is what risk is related to your system based upon no controls being considered, just what types of technology you're using, is going to be higher than most other organizations because of all of that and the wide breadth. And the problem with a lot of IT staff, not their problem, the problem that they have is that they try to provide all these services to the organization, and it takes time away from other things because they are trying to be those innovators. They are trying to help the organization. It's just the challenges that they have can be insurmountable without budget and staff necessary to do it. Or even a seat at the table if you wanted to talk about senior management involvement with that. Darktrace had a report last year talking about, their threat report 2019 talked about IoT devices. And again, basic security controls, we already know this, basic security controls are missing from these types of devices. And so we introduce those devices to our networks, everything from cameras to, the personal assistants, like the Google Home or Alexa, even for your homes, just think about this, all those types of devices that you now have in your networks. Your blender or your washing machine that can connect to the internet, when was the last time it was patched, right? Does it have any vulnerabilities? Do you know if it has any vulnerabilities? Who even checks that stuff? I don't even think about my washer and dryer can go and connect to the internet. I have no reason why it needs to. So it's not connected. I wouldn't want to have it connected on my wireless network. But, it's those types of things that, some people are like, oh, cool, let's just connect that, and then don't think about the security related to it. And as a home user, that's much more difficult to do than in a corporate environment, but it's still difficult to do in a corporate environment, especially when it's a consumer electronic. Someone just buys it, pops it in the network, gets on the wireless, and then all of a sudden, you know, they have Alexa in the conference room. You know, it's probably not a good idea because we know that Alexa and those types of devices, and don't want to pick on just Amazon, but those type of devices listen in on the conversation. Not that your phones might not be doing it either, so that's another whole different story, but don't want to get into that right now. Part of the trouble that you have with IoT and OT is that they're slightly different than each other, and again, there's another webinar about this. But when you look at the longer life support period or the longer lifetime that you have with OT, like traffic lights are not something that you're going to replace every 5 years or every 3 years. You buy those things and you want them to last 20, 25 years, right? The problem is technology outpaces. It changes so fast that those old systems can't keep up with the new software that's out there for them. And again, there's another presentation you can watch on that. And most of these, all the management is done locally. The software sometimes cannot be updated because of the old systems. In order for the software to work for it, eventually it gets to a version number that you can't use anymore. And so OT has that challenge. IoT, they're expecting you to throw it away and buy another one, right? So there's very little, there's almost no support period for those things. And then you just replace them as needed. And so there's different challenges related to them, right? OT stuff, you may go out there and you may change out the ICS system in particular, but an IoT device, you probably just replace the device itself. So different ways of handling it, but in either case, vulnerability management, patch management is almost absent. Some OT has some really good patch management stuff, but it's separate from the normal IT patch management. So it's another process that has to be handled. And oftentimes IT is unaware of it. And the engineers that are in charge of it are thinking IT is going to be in charge of it, or, you know, there's this responsibility that nobody has, you know, playing hot potato with it. On the IoT side, again, there's little or none of that. Some of the new IoT devices are starting to do automatic patch management, but what happens when it's not doing it, right? I had a conference room control center that was trying to update itself, but they had changed where to get updates, and it was no longer updating itself. And so then we had to call, we couldn't update it, we had to call the service provider to have them update, or a reseller to do it. And it really put a bad taste in my mouth. It was like, I should be able to update my device, but no, the manufacturer won't do it. You have to go to a reseller to have them do it. Of course, you're going to get charged for that, when I feel like I should be able to just download and upload the patch if necessary. And then I have no way of doing that, so I have to contact these people on a regular basis to do updates on it. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. And we already kind of talked about this next slide, vulnerability and patch management being the issue. And sometimes IT being different things. So what we have found, and this is just a recent article from last month, there's a lot of new ransomware out there, and it's specifically targeting industrial control systems. So we've now seen a little bit of a change in the ransomware tactics. I just did a presentation last month on new changes to their tactics, and then this is yet a new one. Is they're specifically targeting ICS systems. In the past, the attackers had added on, you know, maybe doing some crypto mining while they were waiting for you to pay the ransom or not pay the ransom or recover the system. And then we started seeing them do other types of things, like try to exfiltrate data from that. So this is where we're kind of seeing a new trend, and that is that they're specifically targeting ransomware and our industrial control system. And the interesting thing with this is it doesn't necessarily look like nation states are trying to do it. We always knew that nation states were trying to do it, and when they were doing it, they weren't trying to make money. They were just trying to knock down critical infrastructure. So now it's an interesting move forward that cyber criminals are getting into it. And in the past, cyber criminals weren't as interested in ICS systems. They were interested in getting paid, right? So let's just talk about ransomware. There's all these other threats out there, but let's just talk about ransomware as one instance. So in order for you to mitigate it, There's an interagency guide that the U.S. government came out with, which a bunch of federal agencies kind of got together to come up with it. Then the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency had some separate guidance for it. MSISAC, if you're familiar with them, also had some guidance. The UK government and Canadian government and Australian government have come out with guidance as well. And NIST now has guidelines and recommends a cybersecurity framework. And there's a number of private industry reports and recommendations. Now, I look at all these different things. The AICPA, which is the Association of Certified Public Accountants, they came out with a nice little blog saying, hey, for ransomware, there's these 3 things you need to do. All right, 3 things isn't enough. I don't know where they got. Anyways, there's a lot more you need to do than those 3 things. If you do those 3 things, you're still going to be exposed, right? So taking all of this and putting it together into one checklist, which is what we did to help our clients, and it's free. We're giving it away free because we want you guys to, be protected as much as possible. There's like 80 some odd different controls that are necessary to prevent or mitigate the impact, right? So those are the 2 things that we're looking for. That comes from the government recommendations. And the reason why we have like UK and Canadian in there, because they, based upon ransomware attacks that they saw in there, they thought that this other control might have helped a little bit more to prevent it. So we included it. We felt that it would be better to be exhaustive than minimalist in this one. And that's why we have 80 some odd controls for that. And again, like you said, you can download it. It's free checklist. It's in Bright Talk in the attachments and links, so you can check it out there, or you can just go right through our website and get it. And here's the thing: if you don't have those 81 controls in place, what can you do to kind of prevent ransomware between now and the point in time where you can get all those controls in place? And I think that is where, and Jeff and Nate are going to talk here in a minute about where Darktrace can kind of help fill that gap, get you something on the ground right now to fix the problem using AI. While you work on getting your patch management process into place and your vulnerability management and configuration management, all those other things that we always talk about in proper IT governance that typically aren't getting done to the extent that they need to be done. And to cover systems like ICS systems that don't have those rudimentary controls that we already talked about. So great, we have all these controls that you should do, and you can't do them because ICS systems may not have that capability. So what can you put into place? Can you leverage something like AI to prevent that? But if you think about it, you need something that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We've seen ransomware where they launch it at nights and weekends, knowing that local government IT staff is typically not around on nights and weekends. Also, you need something that's going to mitigate multiple threats, not just ransomware, right? And I'm not saying that there's any silver bullet here, but you want to be able to mitigate as many threats as possible, not just ransomware. But it's good that ransomware is included, obviously. You need something that doesn't require more staff, if staffing is an issue already. If you're already running around fighting fires, you need something you just put in and get you fixed today, right? You can spend all your time trying to get more staff and all that. It's going to take months, or get your staff trained and all that kind of stuff. You need something you have working tomorrow, basically. So you want something that's automated, and you want something that's going to cover IT, OT, IoT, and you want something that's going to prevent the ransomware from spreading, catch it as soon as possible, and you need something that's going to be cost effective. Now, in order to do all these other things with humans, you'd have to have a whole separate security operations center and all kinds of tools that go along with it for them to do the investigation. There's a lot of cost in that. So one of the other things that we found in something that we use at Mays & Associates is Darktrace, and that's why I wanted to bring that up, because this fills that gap. It's much more cost effective than trying to pay for staff or get new staff up to speed and having them work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And for them to do the best that they can to try and find stuff is still not going to get anything close to instant or within seconds of addressing an issue. We need something that's beyond our capabilities. And so that is why, and we can see this article that was in Wired magazine talks about how the machines fight back, how AI is future-proofing the cities of tomorrow. This is what Nate and Jeff are going to talk about here next. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Nate and Jeff, who are on the line with me, who are going to talk about how Darktrace can help local governments.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Don, for the introduction. Hello to all the viewers at home. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. My name is Nate with Darktrace. I am one of the cybersecurity account managers. My portfolio mainly consists of smaller cities, local governments, municipalities, and of course breaches up to some larger cities as well. And with me is our Executive Vice President and subject matter expert on cyber physical security to talk about ICS and OT, Dr. Jeff Cornelius. And so I'll be handling a little bit about Darktrace and our solution in general, speaking a bit to my experience, and then Jeff will take over and speak to a couple of our case studies and ICS environments as well. So thank you again, Don and Mays and Associates, for having us on the webinar. And if you folks have any questions live, please feel free to drop them in the question box, or feel free to reach out to Don afterwards, and we can speak with you on our own. So Darktrace really offers a cyber AI platform. As Don mentioned before, there are a lot of challenges facing local governments, and I'd like to split them up into two. The first one, of course, is the diversity in the threats that are being posed to y'all, especially as we see us all working remotely right now. You know, we talk on ransomware, especially in the local government case, but there are many other forms of malware out there. And so there's a diversity in the threats that we're seeing on the day-to-day. But on top of that, it's kind of the low, I don't want to say human response time, but as Don mentioned earlier, the kind of staffing challenges that local governments face. And so, you know, we may not have someone on there 24/7, 365, and therefore augmenting the security team is what Darktrace is all about by offering the cyber AI platform. And so the way that we're linked up is we have two separate AI running fronts. We have the enterprise immune system, which augments the human support team and gives us the live notifications and threat model features that we're seeing on the day-to-day. We have the Darktrace Antigena Autonomous Response AI engine. And so that AI engine is going to be running all time, 55, 24/7, and severing surgically every single autonomous connection above a certain percentage that is going to potentially be of threat to the environment. One thing that's important to mention is, of course, that Darktrace is going to cover all of the different modes which an attacker can get through. You'll notice at the bottom, cloud and SaaS applications are becoming more and more relevant. You know, we're seeing, I'm pretty much all of my local governments start to move into the cloud in some way, whether that's 20% to, you know, 80%. And IoT environments are becoming something that I've seen on the day-to-day. One of the cities I work with, they have a installed just for a local hawk that comes to visit them. So it's something that I'm seeing more and more. Its own security protocols. It may not have anything that can update or patch it, as Don mentioned before. And so having that connected to the network can be a form of a door for an attacker to get through. So I want to touch on the first AI engine first, which is the enterprise immune system. And so the way that the enterprise immune system works to pick up all of the different IPs that we're seeing is it learns a sense of self. This is where the power of AI and machine learning really comes through. Machine learning as a function of AI for every user, device, and the network as a whole. The enterprise immune system can gain an understanding of how does a user act on the day-to-day normally log in. When is it that this user connects to another machine, or when is it that an IoT device, connects to the network? How often are internally and externally? And from there, we're able to find threats that other tools miss, because we're not necessarily looking at what is bad based on rules and signatures. Instead, we're looking at what is normal for the device. And from there, we're able to piece together different incidents and different models. And with the use of a cyber AI analyst, we'll investigate threats and write reports for teams. And that solves for that staffing issue of, okay, well, I don't have 8 hours of the day to wear my cybersecurity hat, 30 to an hour, to make sure that I'm able to make, to have a cybersecurity stance. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at the cyber AI analyst stitching together separate incidents on a kill chain to make a overall report for folks within local governments. And we're seeing that the investigating and triaging time is reduced up to 92%, something like 4 hours of one specific incident to, something like 20 minutes where we're able to provide all that metadata for you that we're analyzing. And from there, we have our secondary AI engine, which is our autonomous response. We call it Antigena here, keeping up with that enterprise immune system. Highly relevant for today, although I wish it wasn't. Our autonomous response is going to be precise and highly targeted. It's going to be surgical, and it's not going to disrupt the day-to-day. So when a lot of people think of AI on their network in terms of taking action, especially in the security stance, a lot of folks think of folks think of taking the device off the network entirely, right? That's not what Darktrace wanted to solve. What we wanted to do was be able to answer any sort of connections that we're seeing, any sort of, whether that's external or internal. We want to make sure that in the cloud environments, we're also taking autonomous action to deal with something like a misconfiguration or low and slow data leakage. And we want to make sure that the IoT devices are behaving normally and to enforce that normal pattern of life. And so that's what the autonomous response is able to do. It's able to take granular action based on the metadata that we see in the enterprise immune system and the intelligence that we know of what is normal in the enterprise immune system, and then take autonomous response 24/7, 365, without having any folks go in and triage it right away. It holds it for you so that you're able to isolate an incident and make sure that that is not going to escalate to something potentially exponentially more malicious. And one thing that I've also seen in a lot of my deployments of Antigena for not only email but also for just in general the enterprise immune system and more enterprise-focused deployments is that it needs to be highly configurable. It needs to be customizable, and not every two local governments are going to have the same deployment of Antigena within their environments. And so what we want to do is, or what I've seen a lot, I should say, is that we build trust through human confirmation mode. So, AI is not going to be, as one of my clients put it, running rampant on their network. Instead, what it's going to be doing is it's going to be building trust through human confirmation mode until an IT manager, an IT director, a CISO, CIO, whomever decides that, it's taking the appropriate actions necessary to sever connections without disrupting normal business operations. And from there, they will then let AI take over and do the 24/7, 365. Through our mobile app, you can confirm the actions Antigena would take. As far as remotely, you can be at home, wake up at 3 in the morning, unfortunately, with ransomware maybe running rampant on your network, and hit Antigena's human confirmation mode, and you'll be good to go and good to rest until you're in the office the next day. I've seen a lot of that happening recently, or I guess I should say more so in 2019, but in 2020, I'm sure that this could be, that it could happen again. And then, like I mentioned, Darktrace is cloud native. We're seeing a lot more of these VTAP solutions come out, especially for AWS and Azure. And so with that, we're becoming more and more integrated within the cloud. And we're able to not just detect, like I said before, low and slow data leakage or misconfigurations within the cloud, but we're also able to respond through our autonomous solution within the cloud as well. But a place I've seen everywhere, or everyone that I work with deploy the autonomous response solution is within their email space. And so understanding the context of how a user behaves within the enterprise is crucial for understanding and taking action within the email space. Having context to prevent spoofing, spear phishing campaigns. This is where I see pretty much all of my accounts putting in the autonomous response solution. Understanding user behavior from the enterprise is quintessential for having a machine speed response within the email solution. And so I wanted to kind of pose a couple of different pieces of what I've seen with a bunch of the cities that I work with over here on the West Coast, in terms of not just the enterprise immune system and the deployment of Darktrace in that context, but also with autonomous response, not just for the enterprise, but for email security. To round out everything that Darktrace can offer, I do want to switch over to the OT and ICS sides, which I'll let Dr. Jeff Cornelius speak to a little bit more. But that is Darktrace in a nutshell for the enterprise side. And so I'll pass it off to Jeff right now. Jeff?
Thank you very much, Nate. Appreciate it. And Don and Nate have both done a great job of kind of covering what Darktrace does from a very high-level perspective, and also the challenges that sit within the municipalities and local state governments that we provide services and solutions to. Darktrace is very, very well deployed across local and municipal governments in the United States, as well as across Europe, Middle East, as well as South America. One of the things that we're finding more and more are people are realizing the bridge between IT systems and their OT systems does exist. As much as we all want to believe that my water treatment facility is completely isolated from my IT systems in my corporate offices, we realize quickly that they are not. And one of the strongest value props that Darktrace offers is understanding what that data flow looks like, what those connection points look like, and helping you mitigate that risk. So Don and Nate asked me to join, just kind of talk a little bit about how Darktrace Industrial is approaching these challenges within state and local governments, municipalities. Think airports, think water treatment facilities, distribution and transmission of power, et cetera, fire, water, traffic, all those kinds of challenges. So really what we do is everything that Nate said. We look for patterns of life and behavior of networks, users, and devices. Those patterns of life that we create mathematically, that we understand mathematically, tell the machine learning what is normal and what is not normal. From that normal, it's very, very easy for us to determine what abnormal looks like. Once we determine abnormal, we determine how significant that abnormal is by using machine learning and AI to compare the behavior of that device to other devices. A bit in the weeds there for everyone, but it's really important to understand this is not a rule or signature-based deliverable that takes management going forward. What it actually takes is about a half an hour to install an appliance, about a week or two to learn what the normal behavior of the environment is, and Darktrace is fully operational and delivering value in a week or two. It's just that simple. No updates of signatures or rules or patches that need to be done. It's just very straightforward. And this is one of the reasons for state and local governments that Darktrace Industrial and the Enterprise Immune System have been taken up at such velocity. It's very, very straightforward and simple to use. One of the, I think, most important things that come to bear in a situation like this is the discussion around the real value that Darktrace brings to our organizations that partner with us. As in this particular case, and I can talk to, 40 or 50 other cases like this one, just happens to be a very large central western city, where Darktrace identified ransomware in real time in their environment and was able to mitigate that risk for this organization, for its municipality, at significant pace and scale. Now, what do I mean by that? This particular city is a very, very connected city. They're smart city identified. They have just over 30,000 sensors around the city, traffic, pedestrian flow, even sensors within the waste cans, the trash cans along the streets. And Darktrace monitors all the behavior, not only of all those sensors, but all of the behavior of the devices in the water treatment facilities that deliver copious volumes of water to these hotels. All the power distribution and transmission that delivers power to all of these hotels across this entire city. This breach was launched by a spear phishing attack on the IT systems that nailed and finagled its way into other systems within the environment. Antigena was able to identify and then block the behavior of this device once it was identified and this device's typical behaviors, and was able to mitigate that risk for this organization in a very, very short period of time. We're talking minutes, not days, weeks, or months. And the typical response time, I think Don mentioned it earlier, typical activity time for a piece of ransomware within an organization is 137 days or something, Don. I'm not sure exactly the date that's current now, but I know 6 or 8 months ago, it was 137 days active in an environment. Darktrace is operating at the minutes and hours level, just to give you guys an indication of the speed and veracity. So some other environments that we operate in. So water treatment facilities are really big customers in Darktrace, many, I should say. And that's because of the ease of installation. The appliances are typically installed in an hour and operational within minutes after that, and patterns of life developed within a week or two. And in OT environments where PLCs, PLMs, HMIs, DCSs are predominant, SCADA systems are predominant, those patterns of life are fairly quickly developed and fairly quickly understood. One of the questions I often get asked about this time is, well, what happens if you're already compromised when Darktrace comes in? Well, that's a great question. One of the tools we use is a form of artificial intelligence that allows us to look at other devices within the environment and understand what those devices do compared to the device that's under investigation. And all this is done at machine speed, right? All this is done completely automatically. So we compare devices within families of devices and create patterns of life about those families. That gives us very, very specific and detailed information about the way a device behaves and shouldn't behave. So we can tell you very quickly when a device behaves out of character. So if you compromised before Darktrace deploys, the moment that a piece of ransomware or a piece of activeware begins doing whatever it is it's going to do, whether it's searching for a command and control place or beaconing a location, Darktrace is going to identify it as anomalous and alert you to it. So that's the typical question that I get about this time. And I'll stop there and turn it back over to Don and Nate. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them for us.
Yes, if you have any questions, please let us know. And for all of you that stayed to the end to listen to our presentation, I'm going to give you a piece of information that you may not necessarily know as a bonus for staying to the end. And that is that the Star Wars 4K 9-disc set is out today. So, and guess what? You can order it from Best Buy online, and you can pick it up today.
That's great, Don.
Because guess where I'm going right after this? I got to go pick that up. Anyways, thank you all for attending. If there's any questions, please put them in there. If you would like a free trial of this, contact us, and we'll get you set up with Darktrace, and you can see it for yourself. Like I said, we use it here at Mays & Associates. We only have 60 employees, but it is well worth it, money well spent for us. Because and the funny thing is, I have it on the mobile app so that I can see what's going on in our network, and all of a sudden I'll get like a alert, and then I'll pop on it, and I'll call my network guy and say, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I was doing this, because he's not normally doing it at midnight, right? So that's how fast I catch it, and he's like, gosh, I just logged on. But it's very fast and very efficient, and we've really enjoyed having it so far, just because, like everybody else, we don't have perfect patch management, especially for weird things like, the conference rooms that we have to deal with. Just to make sure that you know, this webinar can be suitable for continuing education or CPE self-reporting. So just make sure you get the little certificate over there. Wait until you're done with the presentation, and then you can get it for that. Also know that Mays & Associates has a bunch of other different services that we can help you with. If you're interested, you can go to maysassociates.com/cybersecurity. And then you can also see some of our different affiliations with different partners such as Darktrace, Infotech, or Qualys to help you. But again, I ask that everybody stay safe and follow our channel if you'd like, and then please rate us. We would like to improve our presentations in the future, so please give us a rating. And if you have any questions, I don't have any from the audience, so please go ahead and let us know in the future. Just send us an email or fill out a form on our website, and we will get back to you. Also, my blog, if you're interested, at learnsecurity.org, you can check out that as well. Thank you very much, and let's work together to help make the world cyber safe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all. Thank you all.